What happens when a painting begins to speak back to the artist? When the act of creation becomes a conversation rather than a command? Abstract painter Demetrius Wilson reflects on a practice shaped by intuition, memory, and the quiet influence of a pre digital childhood. His work moves through color, gesture, and scale, asking how we hold emotion, environment, and experience all at once. Is abstraction a language of freedom or a way of finding meaning in what resists definition?
My name is Demetrius Wilson. I'm an abstract painter based in New York City.
You recently had a show that just closed a couple of weeks ago at Half Gallery. It's your second solo exhibition with the gallery. And as you think about having just closed that show, what were some of the things that were most interesting and surprising to you about making this body of work?
I think over the course of the past couple years, I think with any artist, the hope is to always get better and better with each and every body of work. And I feel like going into my second exhibition with the gallery, building off of, current themes and motives and ideas from the past, I felt like this body of work was my best body of work as an established artist. So I was very content and honestly amazed at the efficiency of which I was able to articulate and create. It kind of all worked out just as I wanted it and a little bit better.
Is that something that you say would, in your experience as an artist, does it frequently work out better than you had expected, or does that happen sometimes?
I think that's the beauty of art, at least in my eyes. Everything always happens way better than I anticipate. Because I think, as an artist, at least speaking for myself, I try not to go into painting these works with tunnel vision. Like I usually have an idea or a scope of an idea, and I'm able to always deliver it. But I'm always amazed at how symbiotic me and the actual painting process is. Like it's kind of like the painting is alive in a way. And it always has this immediate feedback, which I'm always able to pick up on. And I think over the course of the past couple of years, like I mentioned, I think I've been able to be a lot more efficient in capturing the essence or the essence of the ideas a lot smoother. So I think to answer your question, yes, it always does happen to be better than I anticipate, but I think that's just a very amazing sweet treat from the whole entire process of painting.
Definitely. And it is a process, right? It's one that's really rigorous and it requires a lot of attention and it requires a lot of introspection and deep thinking. And I think any artist that I've ever spoken to who is specifically a painter and really deals within the language and the medium of painting speaks to some of the challenges and difficulties of the work, but also the things that that's part of the beauty of it, that at the same time that it's really hard and it requires a lot of you, that it also gives a lot back to you, right? There's sort of an exchange happening between you and the material, between you and the language of painting, between you and the actual physical act and the labor of the work. I read that you are, East Coast born and raised, that you grew up in the 90s. And I'm also, I'm an 80s baby, but I grew up in the 90s. And people romanticize the 90s a lot, right? Like we're off of the just the craziness of AI, the proliferation of AI, the proliferation of social media. I mean, I think there are a lot of folks who are within our generation who were it's almost like you consider yourself like the last of the Mohicans or something at this point, because you're really the last generation who straddled this world of growing up. I remember when that we weren't using Instagram. Like we were just using MySpace. We were just using Facebook's core memories of growing up in a world where it didn't exist, and the way that you connect with people has changed so much. The way that people think about the world has changed so much. So I want to just really pose the question of, what do you think, growing up on the East Coast and being a 90s kid and being raised of a particular time, how do you think that that's influenced you? And yeah, how does it maybe come out in your work and the way that you think about your artistic practice?
So, I mean, I think the term used for the 90s, like it's like the golden era. I kind of would even equate it to like the old world. Like there was like the time right before, like you mentioned, like the boom. the internet. I think the internet probably happened a little bit closer to the 2000s, but I was born in '96, so I was still able to enjoy bits of the '90s before we started to go into the next decade, and it just felt like a very different time. You know, it's something that I always talk about in my work, more so like how I kind of feel bad for the later generations, how they weren't able to experience the simplicity of life in a way. I feel like technology kind of made things a little bit more complicated while still things easier. I think being outside until the streetlights came on, summer nights, you know, I think it really does influence my work because before AI, before the boom of the internet, like we actually had to really live, just kind of like you don't always have the answers at your fingertips. And I think that comes across in my painting. So you kind of see the exploration of ideas of, these color relationships, of these compositions that I'm trying to, you know, just explore for like, I feel like, my upbringing really has a direct resemblance to the way my process is in painting. I always have an idea, but it seems to be that the work tends to have a little bit more of a fluid way of happening. I think that's also a very important thing for me. I had a lot of fun growing up in the '90s, and I always tell myself and always tell other people, like, if you aren't having fun as an artist, then why even do it? Because it's a very laborious, intense, mentally and physically occupation, and there's a lot of responsibility. But yeah, I mean, it has a tremendous influence on me. People always say my works are environmental, and I think for me, part of it is I like to talk about our relation to certain parts of the environment because we all are from different parts, but we all kind of have a very similar experience. So I'm always talking about that in the work.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the environment because I think in this show, Light in a Dark Mirror, your second show with Half Gallery that just recently closed, the color palette is really interesting. It's very warm and it's somewhat ethereal, but it also feels like, with colors like red and orange and siennas, there's this sort of passionate feeling that it invokes for me, right? It feels very alive, but alive in a way that feels very much like a fire or like heat or like flames. And so, can you share sort of maybe what were some of the ways in which you were thinking about not only environment, but just how your color choices would evoke certain feelings and or emotions through this body of work and through this show?
Yeah, I think I've kind of become known for my amazing choice of using color, very endearing ways. And I think for this body of work, I really wanted to push what color meant for not only the painting, but one way to do that is to play on temperature and intensity, contrasting colors. So I talk about fire radiating heat a lot in the body of work for the show, and I think it's just the way for me to articulate past things, but try to bring it to another level. I joked with myself in the studio. I felt like these were like more like religious paintings, like in the Bible, the Christian Bible. Like it talks a lot about darkness and light, but I think those are very, even though that's a more religious scope of looking at it, I think it's a very light and dark are pretty human uh, qualities that we all tend to share. Like we're born in darkness and then we come into light and then we try to explore, we try to make a life for ourselves. So I was, just really playing with a lot of ideas as well while still trying to push things that I've done in the past. And the color, like you said, it brought these very passionate feelings towards it. And I feel like this body of work was definitely passionate to say the least. Yeah, I feel like a lot of my works usually have a lot more darker tones. So this work, it was a lot more expressive, a lot more lighter. But I kind of call myself a trickster in a way because I like to trick people by drawing them in with these beautiful paintings. But sometimes they do talk about heavy subject matter, and it just kind of makes people want to stay a little bit longer to kind of probe and dissect it a bit more.
Yeah, in your response, you mentioned that you're a Christian, and I've read that as well. It's also, sort of publicly sort of mentioned when reading up a little bit about you and your work and what does it mean to be raised as a Christian and how do some of those beliefs that come through the Bible make their way into your work? And would you say that you are a religious and or spiritual person? Is that something that sort of guides your work or influences your work in to a degree?
I wouldn't say I'm religious. I mean, I definitely have a relationship with God. I just think, growing up, you know, being forced to go to church, not really having a say in the matter of, getting into religion. I think it's kind of just forced upon you when, growing up. So then by the time you're like teenager, like you kind of want to get away from it a bit. But as I get older, I kind of try to come back into it and have a little bit more understanding from my own lens. I wouldn't say that it really drives the work. Maybe within the last body of work, I definitely consider those paintings a lot more of like, religious paintings. I think it's something still very fresh to me. And I'm still trying to have an understanding of like what it is that I'm actually trying to articulate within the scope of religion or how that plays into my work.
And for folks who may be seeing or learning about your work for the first time through this video, what is it about the language of abstraction that really began to draw you in? Maybe as a student, how did abstraction really in sort of yeah entice you? Is maybe what I want to say. Yeah.
I mean, originally I started off as more of a figurative artist. Especially, I started painting around 2015, so it's been about 10 plus years now. But back in undergrad, I picked up a paintbrush for the first time seriously, and I felt like, well, I need to learn how to paint and I want people to like my paintings. So one way to do that is to, work within a visual language that a lot of people are familiar with, and that's figuration. And I was right. A lot of people did like the paintings. I was more hyper realistic. People liked it, but by the time COVID hit, that was 2 years post undergrad. I kind of wanted to, do something that I actually more enjoyed. So by the time COVID ended, I was able to have an opportunity to go to Hunter. And like my first like weekend, first couple weeks in, I made the shift to abstraction. The reason for even making that shift into abstraction was because I wanted to expand not only my vernacular, but also I wanted it to share a visual library with folks that grew up with me, like my family, my friends, and kind of bring them into the world of abstraction. Growing up, the only artwork that you see is representational or like figurative, and I felt like it was so many other visual languages out there, and I wanted to share that. That's how I originally started. I wanted to basically encourage other people to look into abstraction. And I think one way to do that is to kind of lead by example by literally creating work that they like and they know me. So they're like, okay, we'll give it a chance. But abstraction is very complex and I like the challenge. And it requires context, a little bit more context than figuration. So it's a lot more cerebral for me. And yeah, I mean, I got this word from Rashid Johnson. He used the word didactic. Like, I just felt like figurative and representational work was too spoon fed, and it didn't really give the viewers enough of an opportunity to really grasp the work on their own terms. I felt like I was just giving it to them. So, abstraction was a means for me to push not only beyond my creative practice, but also to encourage my audience to look to see what else is out there.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you talked about that and shared some of your reflections about how the language of abstraction initially drew you in, but also where you started as an artist and sort of where you are now. And for the Half Gallery show, you mentioned Ed Clark and something that he had said when he was still alive, that the painting is the subject. And Ed Clark was such a pioneer in so many ways. Are there other artists besides Ed Clark? You mentioned Rishi Johnson, but are there other artists that deeply inspire you in terms of maybe just their artistic practice, their life, the things that they've done, and also maybe the ways in which they've expanded, yeah, the artistic movement of abstraction?
I'm gonna try to give you like four. No, I mentioned that Clark, but I think another amazing artist. that finally got their credit was Jack Whitten. I got exposed to Jack Whitten a little bit later in my artistic career, like more so actually in undergrad, I mean, in graduate school. And, he had a very fascinating way of pushing the material. I feel like Jack Whitten is like he was like an expansion of Ed Clark. I thought he was amazing. Then it went from Ed Clark to Jack Whitten to Mark Bradford. Mark Bradford is a genius. I mean,
Absolutely.
I like the way he even got into art. Like it was just like I'm not even sure if you're familiar with his story, but I mean, he's just like an amazing artist, and I just love artists that create not only like these large scale works, but they're very detailed, and there's a lot of social political commentary that I like an artist that doesn't shy away from the social aspect because I think art is always going to be political. You can say it's not, you can try to it, but as artists, we're cultural bearers. Like we kind of are the ones who most times are the ones that are leading and starting conversations. So I love Mark Bradford, and then two European artists, Francis Bacon and Cecily Brown. Cecily Brown, amazing colorist. I love the way she handles paint. She's phenomenal. Shout out to women artists. I think they're incredible, and I don't think they get their due justice, but they're finally getting it. So that's amazing. And I always love to support and cherish them. And Francis Bacon, older European artist, but I love, and I'm very influenced. It's even in my artist statement. I love the way his paintings are just so dark. Not even just like obviously like painting wise, but also like subject matter. I think it's very holds dear to like what it is to be human. He just handles violence so beautifully. But yeah, and John Michel Basquiat, like he was the reason why I even wanted to be a painter. I saw a documentary back in 2015 going into my sophomore year of college, and I was like, how can I not give myself the opportunity to pursue something like this? Because he was a genius, and yeah, that's why I'm still doing it.
I love that you mentioned women artists because they do deserve all of the praise and all of their due. There have been so many women artists throughout history that just, their stories are lesser told, lesser known. And that continues to proliferate, sort of, even in present day. The work still needs to be done to share those stories, to tell them, and also to dig into archives and dig into the depositories that we do have where we can understand and learn more about folks who were living, working, and creating at different times throughout history, both here, abroad. And there's so much that's happened in the Caribbean and such an incredible well of history and knowledge that comes from cultural practices, artistic practices. As we round out the episode, I want to talk a little bit more about the frequency and the speed of the work because there does seem to be a lot of sort of, your strokes are wide, they're also a bit jagged, some of them can be kind of like rough. These are the things that I think when I see your work. But then also you have your works on paper, right? Where you have this smaller, more intimate moment where you can engage with the work, where it feels like you can get a lot closer because of the scale. But can you talk a little bit about the physicality of the work and sort of the laborious nature of your process, and sort of like how you engage with paint?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a wrist painter. Like I'm very, and like I always work very large bodies of work. I just feel like the larger the work, the more physical I'm able to be. And I feel like I like when it shows through in the paintings. Like not only does the brushstroke show through, but you can see how I'm handling the compositions and how I'm just figuring it out in the paintings. And you kind of see the history in each body of work in each painting. Literally, you can see how ferocious that I am in the painting. So I like the words that you use because it is very taxing, laborious painting that I'm doing. But it's funny because I feel like my bigger paintings, like the larger works versus like the smaller works, even like the smaller paintings and the works on paper, they feel more macro, even though they're smaller. And it's the opposite for larger works. It feels like they're more zoomed. The larger works now, like the larger works look like more of like close-ups of the subject versus like the smaller works like more zoomed out. You kind of see everything. I don't know. I just I have different languages for the sizes that I'm working within, and I try to use parts from each size Like, I have some detailed work in the larger paintings, but for the most part, the strokes are wide, they are jagged. It is a lot more rougher versus, the more dainty, a little bit more detailed, a little bit more patient mark making in the smaller paintings. I feel like it's actually easier to make mistakes on a smaller painting versus a larger one because it's less
Totally.
for everybody to look at. So you kind of have to be even more intentional. So yeah, I mean, um, yeah, I just love painting and I love pushing myself into different sizes and how I can, literally change the intensity on whatever I'm working on.
As we round out, just a final question for the episode. If you could sit down, have dinner, chat with any artist, living or dead, maybe someone that just has deeply influenced your work, and have a conversation and sort of cut up with them, who would that be and why?
That is I think I would love to sit and talk with Joan Mitchell. I feel like she was a badass of a painter, and she held her own even in that male dominated era of painting. As during the Abex movement, and I feel like she is one of the better Abex painters during that time. And women were catching a lot of shit, and she was that good. So I would love to just sit down and talk with her and like John Michelle Basquiat. He just seems fun, especially like, outside the studio. I feel like he could help me understand things from a different perspective.
Demetrius Wilson, thank you so much for joining me on an episode of Everything is Connected. It was really great to chat with you today.
Thank you for having me so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, consider supporting our work by becoming a subscriber. When you subscribe to Lightwork, you support the work of contemporary artists and the insightful and impactful conversations that I have with them as we investigate art, culture, and society. You support a female founder and a Black entrepreneurship at a time when our government and private corporations continue to eradicate DEI efforts. Subscribe to our Substack and you'll receive exclusive information and resources about each episode, behind the scenes content, and more. And remember, follow Lightwork across social platforms for more insights into the inner world of contemporary artists and thought leaders shaping culture.